Our leaders are involved in serious discussions, and in the near future, we will witness a political settlement, and we will have a strong, Islamic, inclusive system, which is acceptable by all Afghans.
The Taliban begins to lay out their vision for Afghanistan. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Evacuation flights from Kabul's airport resumed on Tuesday after the tarmac and runway were cleared of the crowds. The Taliban have declared the war in Afghanistan over, and a senior leader said the group would wait until foreign forces had left before creating a new government. For more, we turn now to CGTN's Sean Callebs. Sean, great to have you with us again. The Taliban held their first news conference today. What did we learn?
Well, we learned the Taliban that has emerged from the shadows is really much more politically savvy and going to great lengths to say the things that people around the world want to hear. Whether they will follow through with those, that's the big question. But what did they talk about? They talked about women's rights. They said they wanted to embrace women's rights, but only under their interpretation of Islamic law. And that certainly sent up a red flag to a lot of people around the world. They also said there would be no retribution against those who fought against the Taliban and those who worked with the United States. That's something else that a lot of people around the world wanted to hear as well. They're really going to great lengths to try to appease people, especially internationally, so they will recognize this Talib government. And the person who held the news conference, a longtime spokesman, someone who really emerged from the shadows, had never seen talk before a camera before. So they talked about what is going to happen and the fact that they have emerged as victors after 20 years of fighting, so pretty much they can spell out the rules.
Taking the freedom is the right of all nations. The Afghan people, by using their legal right after 20 years of jihad, were able to take their freedom and clean their country from the occupation and occupiers.
So what will the new government look like? Well, we don't exactly know at this point. We can tell you that former President Hamid Karzai, as well as Dr. Abdullah, who was really ran the High Council on National Reconciliation. They did meet with Taliban leaders today. Hamid Karzai, after he was no longer president, did have a very large house that was built for him on the presidential grounds. So he has always been a very powerful figure there. Should there be reason for concern? If you listen to people on the ground on it, I did talk with some sources, and they said absolutely. They called the Taliban news conference, quote, nonsense. And they said that the Taliban has been going to various doors where they know single women live and marking those doors. And that's obviously a concern because the possible concern that they could take those women and offer them as brides to single Taliban fighters.
One other thing, Sean, that is, what do we know about when the United States will be totally out of Afghanistan? Yeah,
this is another interesting thing. We know that the United States has also been in contact with the Taliban, and that's to be expected because they're trying to find a coherent, peaceful way to get all the people that are U.S. citizens and all those who worked with the United States out of Afghanistan as peacefully as possible. We saw just the chaos that unfolded at the Hamid Karzai civilian airport just yesterday. This is what the State Department had to say about that discussion and how it's moving forward and when they hope to get people out of the country.
The Taliban have informed us that they are prepared to provide the safe passage of civilians to the airport, and we intend to hold them to that commitment.
Do you believe them?
Yes.
Just for clarity on that, is there some deadline that's been set? Has the Taliban given assurances that this will go till August 31st? Is the deadline before that or after that? For clarity on what you just said.
We believe that this can go till the 31st. We are talking to them about what the exact timetable is for how this will all play out, and I don't want to negotiate in public on working out the best modality to get the most people out in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, briefing reporters there and on, and they obviously have a lot of questions. There are two dates that are incredibly important moving forward. The August 31st date, that is the deadline that was negotiated with the Taliban for the United States to be out. So they have to get tens of thousands of both U.S. citizens and those who have now targets on their backs who worked with the United States, whether being translators or worked at the embassy or one of the other facilities throughout the various provinces. They have to get perhaps 100,000 people out of there in that time. President Joe Biden has said he wants to move about 10,000 people a day. Yesterday moved just a few hundred, so they have a lot of work to do in front of them. So a lot of focus going on there, and clearly the Taliban in a very powerful seat right now. The U.S. negotiating with them, trying to make this as peaceful as possible and wrap all this up and end the United States' longest war.
Thank you, Sean. That's CGTN's Sean Callebs reporting there. Well, there is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Torek Farhadi served as an advisor to Afghan President Hamid Karzai. He's currently a senior advisor with the International Trade Center. Also with us, Sumit Ganguly is a distinguished political science professor at Indiana University. And Kamran Bokhari is Director of Analytical Development at the Newlines Institute for Strategy and Policy. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And Kamran Bokhari, let me start with you. This was a humiliating end to the war for the United States. And we know that the Afghan Taliban has received a lot of help and aid from Pakistan, both logistical and political. You wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal in which you say the Afghan Taliban has gone from being a proxy of Islamabad, that's the Pakistan capital, to a threat. Why a threat?
I mean, look, for decades, the Pakistani state was playing with fire when the Taliban were far more closely aligned with Islamabad. And the reason for that is, look, the proxy actually challenges the national narrative of the patron. So the question that I asked in that piece is, how can you keep an Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which is designed in a certain way that is supposed to be democratic, and it has its problems on that end, but it is at least on paper, a constitutional republic, and of course, to a large degree in practice. And next door, you have a medieval Islamic emirate that claims to be a pure Islamic polity. How can they coexist together, especially when the Taliban enjoys strategic depth deep inside Pakistani society, and of course, connections to the Pakistani state. And at this point in time, the Pakistani state consists of people who say that the Afghan Taliban's comeback in Afghanistan is a threat to Pakistan, while there are others who are celebrating it, and quite publicly.
Kamran, Pakistani officials say they've been surprised by the speed with which the Taliban had taken over in Afghanistan. The Pakistan ambassador to the United Nations has talked about the timing of the United States withdrawal. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The ideal time to end the conflict through negotiations might have been when the US and NATO troops were at their maximum military strength in Afghanistan. Continuation of foreign military presence for a longer duration now would not have yielded any positive outcome. Therefore, endorsement by the Biden administration of the previous US administration's decision of troop withdrawal was indeed a logical conclusion to this conflict.
So, Kamran, does the ambassador have a point there?
Well, look, I mean, obviously there's nobody who's going to argue that the United States made lots of mistakes. And these mistakes, or let me put it this way, the die was cast years ago for this outcome. It isn't something that President Biden's administration or President Trump's administration did, although there is blame to share. In December of 2018, wrote an op-ed saying that the talks with the Taliban that the Trump administration was trying to fast track were pointless. And so, of course, there's a lot of blame to go around. But if we continue to just sort of blame each other, then where is the conversation about what to do next? And the United States has withdrawn, and Pakistan is still there. It can't change its geography, and therefore it, of all the actors, needs to be able to be prepared for this situation. So who brought about this situation is a moot point now.
So there is a blame game going on now, and we heard it in President Biden's speech yesterday here in Washington. But what is the best case scenario for the Western powers? What kind of leverage do they have right now?
Well, Anand, look, right now, and then, as I was driving here, there were reports that the United States has, frozen some assets or refused to transfer money to Afghan banks because of the Taliban takeover. So clearly, the purse is one of the leverages. The Afghans, Taliban, are not going to run this country with the same resources that they ran an insurgency on. So it's one thing that money was enough to run an insurgency, but when you are running a government, building a state, you need far more resources, and they are relying on that financial assistance to continue. And this is why they're trying to behave nicely, although practice is different, even as they are speaking through their representatives. So that's a lot of leverage. And I think that, look, people are forgetting that the civil society that exists in Afghanistan is a gain that can't be reversed. It can be weakened, but it depends on what the United States and its allies are going to do moving forward in order to protect them through diplomatic and through the power of the purse. We need to hold the Taliban feet to the fire and say, look, you're committing to these things and you're saying all these things, well, now do them, act upon them, and recognition and engagement with your regime will be contingent on how you behave.
Sumit Ganguly, let's look at the other country that must be looking at these events in Afghanistan very closely, and that is, of course, India. India has been deeply involved in Afghanistan. It is the biggest regional donor and is involved in dozens of development projects in that country. Indian officials tell us that they have been in touch with the Taliban. They said that they call the Afghan Taliban stakeholders that they've been dealing with. But if we look at the speed with which this victory took place for the Taliban, how does it impact India strategically?
I think it impacts India in three different ways. First, I think it'll embolden the insurgents in Kashmir who have been fighting against the Indian state since the early 1990s. The insurgency has ebbed and waned, but once has ebbed and flowed. But once again, I think we will see a rise of the insurgency as many of the insurgents feel emboldened by the Taliban victory in Afghanistan. Furthermore, there is the prospect of the Taliban once again providing sanctuaries to anti-Indian insurgents in Afghanistan, as they did in the 1990s. And third and finally, the significant investments in infrastructure and human development that India made in Afghanistan over the last 20 years is now at considerable risk, are at considerable risk.
So, Sumit, those are significant threats that you're talking about to India in Kashmir, as well as in the Afghan Taliban giving sanctuary to anti-Indian forces in Afghanistan itself. So how does India respond to that?
Well, the first thing what India can do is to withhold recognition. This time, unlike in the 1990s, when I think about 3 different countries had recognized the Taliban, this time they are seeking global legitimacy. And one of the things that the Indians can withhold is the possibility of recognition, something that the United States can also hold in abeyance, as can the states of Western Europe and the like. Secondly, the Taliban, as Kamran very correctly pointed out, will have extremely limited resources, and they will be in desperate need for money. And here, Indian investment and Indian aid could be significant. Bear in mind that India was the 5th largest aid donor and widely considered to be the most effective aid donor to Afghanistan in the last 20 years. And India can withhold that aid. So there are important points of leverage that New Delhi still has over the Taliban government.
All right, let's go to Torek Farhadi, who joins us from Geneva. Torek, great to have you with us. There are concerns over the type of government that the Taliban will introduce in Afghanistan. The Taliban spokesman has been talking about that. We talked to our correspondent a moment ago about that. But let's listen to what the Taliban spokesman had to say.
Our priority is maintenance of security, and then we would have a new government, an Afghan inclusive Islamic government in the coming days. When we are saying an Afghan inclusive Islamic government, that means that other Afghans also have participation in the government, so that to make it an Afghan inclusive Islamic.
So, Tarek, that was the Taliban spokesman Suhail Shaheen. He later said that the Taliban in Afghanistan would respect women's rights, especially the right to education, but he qualified that by saying they would enjoy those rights within the tenets of Islam, of the Islamic religion. So what do you make of it? What are you expecting?
Look, I'm very optimistic about what's going on in my country. We are coming out of 40 years of war. The Taliban have arrived at the presidential palace in Afghanistan without a single bullet being shot in Kabul. Kabul is the city where right now we have more than 10,000 refugees from northern Afghanistan who have come from fighting, and they sleep in the parks and in the streets. My nightmare was if there was resistance in Kabul, there would have been a firefight in the streets, and those populations would have been vulnerable. Nothing of that happened. There hasn't been a popular uprising against Taliban in Afghanistan, neither in Kabul, neither anywhere else. Only in Herat, Ismail Khan, who is a traditional leader, had about 1,000 people around him in a city of 2.2 million people. So the Taliban have had a military victory in my mind. They haven't fought in a lot of places. They were closer to the people. The people of rural Afghanistan were already using their justice system and their courts because the government's justice system was corrupt. The government itself was corrupt. The president fled with money, and the cabinet of the president fled also. And once they were all outside, they started blaming each other on Twitter. The government collapsed.
Right.
We are in the best of situation. The Taliban arrived in Kabul without any fighting. Now, they are going to form a government. I don't expect them to bring any of the current leaders that are known figures. But President Karzai and Dr. Abdullah, who are leaders, have said that they're looking forward to help the Taliban. And the Taliban have given respectful signals. They have given bodyguards to President Karzai. And what we expect is for them to form a government. And if they need any one of us for technical advice, we are ready. Because what we want is now this peace to continue in Afghanistan.
Technical advice is one thing, Tarek, but is there any chance of there being some kind of power-sharing government?
It's possible. They don't have to. They have won the battle. But if they are generous, yes, they might bring. Today they said we want a woman in the government.
Right.
Right now, in the last 2 days, they have asked the mayor of Kabul to stay in his post, and they have asked the current caretaker minister of health to stay in his post.
Right.
They want the business of the state to go on.
Yeah. Okay. At this stage, I want to bring in Victor Gao. He joins us from Beijing. He is the chair professor at Beijing's Soochow University. Victor, great to see you again. Victor, China and Afghanistan share a border. It's a very short border, though. But does the U.S. withdrawal give China a chance to expand its influence in Afghanistan? And I'm thinking mainly in terms of China expanding its development projects into Afghanistan as well, those projects under the rubric of the Belt and Road Initiative. It would seem to be a perfect fit for China because, you know, China has been trying for a long time to reopen those ancient trade routes in Central Asia.
Well, first of all, the current situation in Afghanistan is very much of a concern to many countries around Afghanistan, including China, and in particular, including China's Xinjiang Autonomous Region, which has a border of less of 100 kilometers with Afghanistan. And it is fair to say that over the past 20 years, China in general and China's Xinjiang region in particular have been victims of the radicalization spilling over from Afghanistan. Right now, the new government in Afghanistan is to be formed, and China has expressed the view that the internal matters of Afghanistan are going to be decided by the Afghan people. We really need to watch very closely as to what the new government will need to do, especially with regard to women and girls' education. Now, Afghanistan is really in the hub of major transportation and connectivity in that part of the world. If the situation stabilizes in Afghanistan, if the new government is wise enough to promote peace and stability and development in Afghanistan, of course, China can play a major role in terms of helping with economic development and connectivity through Afghanistan to many parts in that very important region going forward.
Kamran, Bokhari, this may present opportunities for China to expand its influence in Afghanistan, but you also say in your piece that a post-American Afghanistan also poses threats for China outside of Pakistan. How so?
Well, look, Anand, the Chinese, if you look at their behavior, all through the last 20 years, they've been trying to do business and have pursued commercial interests all around Afghanistan, but have not gone into Afghanistan itself. We see that in Central Asia. We see that in Pakistan, which is a signature project of the BRI initiative. And most recently, we had the Chinese foreign minister standing next to his Iranian counterpart and announcing a $400 billion transportation and infrastructure project for that country. And they're basically waiting on a new nuclear deal to be able to pursue that project. So that's been the Chinese behavior, and China has basically developed these commercial interests because Afghanistan's security was being underwritten by the United States. The Chinese did not have to worry about Afghanistan, especially because Beijing has never deployed a multi-divisional force beyond its borders for security purposes. Now, with the U.S. withdrawal, Afghanistan becomes unstable, uncertain, and we have a situation where we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Already we're seeing, at least according to the Pakistani foreign minister, it was the Pakistani Taliban who are aligned with the Afghan Taliban who attacked a vehicle a few weeks ago, killing 6 Chinese workers who were working on the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project. So we're already seeing terrorism spilling over, and the Taliban, this was before the Taliban took Kabul. Now, it's one thing to have a military victory, and I agree with Torek that this is an opportunity, but it's going to be another thing to actually establish a government that maintains law and order. So that's why I think that the Chinese are feeling vulnerable, because they want to know with certainty that whatever happens in Afghanistan isn't going to spill over into the neighborhood.
Victor Gar, what do you make of that?
Absolutely. I think the situation in Afghanistan right now is very fluid, and it may take different turns at critical moments. And I think we need to watch the development in Afghanistan very closely. And we need to make sure, and this is what the Chinese government has already taken a view on, that Afghanistan should not be allowed to be used as a springboard of attack on Chinese national interests in China and elsewhere, for example. And the recent attack on the Chinese lives in Pakistan is a very typical example. Such terrorist attacks should be stopped by whatever means, and regional cooperation or international cooperation will be needed. And China has working relations with Taliban, and it depends on what the Taliban will do once they move into control of the government in Afghanistan.
Torek, President Biden said that it was time for the United States to leave, and despite the chaos, he said that he stands by his decision. Let's listen to part of what he had to say.
But if Afghanistan is unable to mount any real resistance to the Taliban now, there is no chance that 1 year, 1 more year, 5 more years, or 20 more years of U.S. military boots on the ground would have made any difference. If the political leaders of Afghanistan were unable to come together for the good of their people, unable to negotiate for the future of their country when the chips were down, they would never have done so while U.S. troops remained in Afghanistan, bearing the brunt of the fighting for them.
So, Torek, in essence, what the U.S. president is saying there, look, it's not us. When you look at this chaos, it's not us, it's the Afghans. Is that fair?
Yes, it is fair. The Afghans, especially in the last 7 years, inherited a government which was extremely corrupt. Ashraf Ghani, who is now a fugitive, lied to the Afghan people about the future, to the last day, lied to his own cabinet, lied to his foreign minister, to his vice president, to everybody, lied to the United States. The United States, with U.S. taxpayer money, financed an army of 300,000 soldiers. Sigar, Special Inspector General for the Afghanistan Reconstruction, reported to Congress that Afghanistan did not have 300,000 soldiers. These were ghost soldiers. So they charged the U.S. taxpayer. The U.S. bought fuel for the military trucks of Afghanistan's army, and commanders sold the fuel in the market. A lot of antiques have happened in Afghanistan. Ashraf Ghani was on top of a corrupt government. And why should the U.S. support a corrupt government? When the U.S. decided to get out, it got out. And personally, I think now it's ending pretty well because there's not a lot of fighting and there's going to be a new government.
Okay. Sumit Ganguly, very quickly, I've only got a minute left. There was a piece written in the Quincy Institute think tank website. It was written by a former CIA officer. And in essence, and I'm going to paraphrase this is what he said. He said, the ultimate reason for the United States, the deeper and more profound reason for the American invasion and lengthy occupation was more pointedly to establish a military and geopolitical foothold in Central Asia on the very borders of Russia and China. All the other stuff, nation building, etc., was secondary. Their main goal was to establish this foothold. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, I really do not. I think the American reaction was a spasmodic reaction to the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and the fact that Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden had taken refuge in Afghanistan led to the American invasion. I buy that completely. This conspiratorial vision that the U.S. wanted to establish a toehold on the edge of Central Asia is a figment and an overworked imagination.
Okay, and I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Time has caught up with us. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.